Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. I'm Jim Morrison, and with me, as always, is our host, Hal Humphreys. Hey, Hal, how are you doing?
I am doing great, Jim, and I'm actually getting really, really excited.
Yes, it's very exciting. We're about a week away from Valuation Expo. We can't wait. It's going to be so much fun. It's going to be real hot, but we're used to that.
It's Las Vegas. It's hot, but nobody's
Yeah,
outside.
that's true. We'll be in most of the time. And one of the people that we'll be talking to there is Scott Reuter, who's the chief appraiser at Freddie Mac, and he's our guest today. Let me bring him in. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Good morning, guys. Doing great. How are you?
Just fantastic. And Scott, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to be with us at this, late date right before Val Expo. We're less than 5 days away from Val Expo, and I'm so very excited about it. Always happy to have you on the show and talk to you. You're one of my favorite guests. Um, I think everybody in the appraiser world probably knows who Scott Reuter is, but instead of going through your history in the business, let's just get like with a thumbnail sketch, a real quick description of what is your job at Freddie Mac? What do you do?
So my title and job title is Chief Appraiser and Single Family Director of Valuation, and the job is to play a part on a very active evaluation team. So we've got a lot of skills spread across the team, from data scientists, from modeling to review appraisers, to a staff of review appraisers that actually do what many of us, including myself, did for years for a bank, and that's review appraisal reports. So we essentially oversee appraisal quality, and that's a direct tie to risk. And I've said many times in public events at Freddie Mac, we do a lot, but our main job is we manage risk. So it's a vital input to the risk management routines and oversight at Freddie Mac.
Yeah, I often think of the role of a real estate appraiser, and as in the private investigations world, I deal a lot with due diligence, and the appraisal process, the appraisal itself is part of a larger due diligence process in general, but it is all leaning towards let's identify and control as much as possible the risk.
Absolutely. Again, I've said many times to my appraiser friends, and I'm an appraiser, that an appraisal informs a risk decision. That's exactly what it does. Back in the day when I was pouring my heart and soul into my work, and without the benefit of any sketch software, I loved doing the sketches, and I loved kind of pouring my heart and soul and energy and sweat into the report. And then the lender would go to the bottom of the second page and scan it for anything that jumped out and moved on. That was telegraphing to me at that time. It was a part of an overall risk decision that they were making, and it still remains the same. And that underpins a lot of the modernization, some of the innovation, and some of the elements about that our business that I don't think are going to change dramatically at all going forward. I think fundamentally we're still going to need appraisals and appraisers. We just may not need traditional appraisals as much as we did, again, based on that risk framework and where appraisers and appraisals fit in.
Yeah, yeah, and talking about the fundamentals and how we used to do things. I'm going to show you something real quick here. You recognize this?
I do indeed.
This is a
Yes.
scale that you have in your desk to use to make sure that your walls are straight on the graph paper when you draw those. I use this thing literally for reading now. I used to use it all the time to draw my sketches.
Hmm.
Don't do that anymore. So yeah, things advance, things change. I do want to get into Freddie Mac's appraisal quality update.
Hmm.
You know, am I reading this right? Is it talks a lot about the acceptable age of appraisers? I kind of take offense at that, Scott. I'm not a young. Oh, I'm sorry. Hang on a second.
Yeah.
The
I
acceptable age of appraisal reports. Sorry, not the acceptable age of appraisers.
Yeah, I don't think we cover any, nor do I plan on covering any of those in a few days. But yeah, kind of the overarching theme is, and we've talked about this before, how is that there's an increased focus, and there will remain an increased focus on appraisal quality, period. And I think the message for appraisers, and we're going to underscore this at least in our messaging in the general session, will be the increased focus on appraiser accountability for their work. I think you saw it last year with the step up from the enterprises on words and phrases, the text detection and ensuring that there's not any problematic words and phrases in the reports, a guide violation for Freddie Mac if there are. And then I think you're going to see focus on the math, the words and the math. And the math being just providing adjustment support. We don't see, now a lot of appraisers do a great job, as I like to try and say, but we're unfortunately seeing a majority of the work that there's really not any market conditions analysis or developed market conditions support in the appraisers, the time adjustment. So we're not seeing that be developed. And when there are adjustments, generally it's a world of unsupported adjustments, and that's problematic.
Yeah, I think you're right. At the end of the day, we as appraisers, and I'm a practicing appraiser, we certify that we've done this work. And if I say in my report, this adjustment is supported by depreciated cost and linear regression, in my work file, there is a depreciated cost worksheet and a linear regression analysis. And let me ask you this, Scott. If I take that analysis and screen capture it or bring it into the report in some form or fashion, is that support for my adjustments?
That's exactly what we want to see. And that's a great example. So, markets are dynamic, and markets nationwide can change over a 12-month period too. So, we trust the appraisers for a lot. That's an area where we really trust their eye and their lens on that market movement. There could be an indication that we could see maybe at an index level that indicates one thing. There could be something different happening in a micro market. That's perfectly fine. Just to your point, append that, do the work, and just tell us the story. It was funny. Last time I saw you in person, I think was at the Spring Axe conference, and I was able to arrange my schedule to be there the full 2 days. So I took in all the sessions and the content, and I think the organizers did a great job. And the one session leading up to that I thought I particularly enjoyed, I didn't know going into it I would enjoy it as much as I did, was the two state regulators from Colorado, the investigators, and then the regulator board in terms of how they handle complaints. And it gave me an insight into at least how one state vets and what they look at. Number one QC issue they see, consistent with us, unsupported adjustments. Two, when a file gets elevated to an investigator, at least in their state, these guys go out of their way to try to give the appraisal, like, hey, you didn't append it to the report. Is it developed somewhere else? Is it in your work file? Did you do it over here? Could you send it to us? I mean, those were the two, I don't know what your opinion was, they were the two nicest guys in the world. They weren't out looking to headhunt and bust kneecaps, and really they weren't out looking for appraisers. They were giving appraisers every benefit of the doubt. And for the most part, the story ended kind of the same way almost every time. Nothing was done, and there's many times not a work file, and there's certainly not that evidence of any developed adjustment support. So listen, and this is not just a finger point, it's just to say to our fellow appraisers and my appraiser friends, look, I go to these conferences, I actually take time to walk around, I spend time on the internet, I spend time with education providers like you. There's a lot of content, there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of tech that appraisers it's at their fingertips to enable them and actually be able to analyze the market, pull in that market support, develop adjustments, and support their adjustments. So anyway, it's a long digression, but it does tie back just to the fact that we're absolutely increasing the intensity for looking to the support for the adjustments.
Yeah, and look, you're right. I tried to attend the ARROW conference, Association of Appraisal Regulatory Officials. At least once a year. They have two conferences a year. And I have spoken with a number of the regulators across the country. For the appraisers out there, a lot of times they see regulators as out there just to bust them. For the regulators that I've met, they've all across the board been really good people trying to do good work. And their goal, their job is to protect the public, be part of protecting the public from bad actors. And the number of complaints that get elevated to the investigation stage is not very high. I don't know what the number is, but there are a number of complaints that come in. Anybody can complain about anything, but the number that actually go to the investigation stage are not very high. And here's the thing. what I found in reviewing appraisers' work over the years for the state of Tennessee is, example, this guy was cited for not having done a highest to best use analysis. And you're familiar with the 1004 form and how much room is allowed in the highest best use analysis, and the way the question is phrased: is the subject's current use its highest best use? Yes, no, if no, explain. The appraiser clicked, checked yes, and there was nothing in the box. There was nothing in the addendum.
Yeah.
But in the work file, and this was back in the day when people had manila folders, they would go out and write on the front of the folder as they're doing the inspection. He had written down HABU and addressed all of the 4 parts of the highest best use. So he did develop it. He just didn't report it, and it was a mistake. So I think a lot of appraisers are actually doing the work in their work file in the process and maybe not reporting it. And what I'm saying is, when you've got that situation, take a screenshot of the math, drop it in the addendum, discuss what you did, why you did it, how you did it. And I think you're golden. All you're looking for is support for what they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. A lot of times you've already done it, but you may have done it, to your point, scratching on the front of a folder. And if you're not, again, and none of this is out to kind of headhunt, while it's a little slower, maybe it's a point time of reflection in some degree. Look at your processes, look at how you build the file, or the appraisal. If you should build it and develop it from the work file out, not develop it and then throw a few things in the work file. And I think if you do that, you're on much more solid footing.
Yeah.
So and a lot of these things tie back. It's not just that Freddie Mac or our friends across the river woke up in a bad mood and now we're going to shine a light here. These are elements, as you know, how, again, we've talked about it, they're in our guide.
Yeah.
Failure to develop and apply proper adjustments when they're clearly necessary in the market is a guide violation. It's an unacceptable appraisal practice, Freddie Mac 5603.4. So it's been in our guide, it's in writing. It's just now is a time, particularly with, as markets dynamically move up and down, it's just an adjustment. It's analysis that you need to do across the board. Market conditions analysis every time in every market. I've had appraisers say, well, if there's no change, I don't do it. No, develop some level of analysis to prove and support the fact that you're not making an adjustment. So
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. Well, hey, Scott, let's do this. Let's take a quick break and hear from one of our sponsors, and we will be right back.
Solidify is one of the nation's most trusted valuation and title partners. With their proprietary technology and extensive network, Solidify delivers industry-leading quality, transparency, efficiency, and scale to the largest mortgage lenders in the U.S. Their marketplace of independent, qualified field professionals makes the homeownership experience extraordinary every time. Visit solidify.com for more information and stay connected with their latest news on LinkedIn.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Appraisal Buzzcast. I'm your host. I'm absolutely tickled today to be joined by my friend Scott Reuter, Freddie Mac. Scott and I are both going to be in Las Vegas next week for Val Expo. And look, here's the thing. Scott is going to be at the show. He's going to be there. He is an approachable dude, right? If you see me, come up and shake my hand. If you see Scott, walk up and shake his hand. Introduce yourself to him. The people at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the GSEs and HUD and VA and all those things, they're human beings just like you and me. Introduce yourself to them, get to know them, and understand that they're not here to, as Scott said earlier, break kneecaps and, as one of my private investigator friends used to say, breaking hearts and skulls. They're here to ensure that we're doing good work. And I'm going to say just right now, the overwhelming majority of appraisers that I deal with across the country are out there doing really good work, thorough work, and doing the absolute best they can to do things in the proper way. So if you're developing things in your work file, market conditions adjustment, GLA adjustments, screen capture the development part that you did, bring it into your addendum, discuss it. just show some support. Scott, let me ask you this. So we kind of, I think we can put the stick down and step away from the horse of adjustment support. I think everybody kind of understands what we're talking about there. You mentioned earlier in kind of the intro, we were talking about text detection and screening for problematic words. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we began through our LCA, our loan collateral advisor, messaging warnings and hard stops a little over a year ago to begin to message to have the language used in appraisal reports align more with our policy. And I can tell you, to your first comment, I have to your prior comment, I should say, I absolutely agree. I think most appraisers do a great job. And I think appraisers are trying to do a good job. And before I answer to your other comment, it's the reason we spend time and effort and bring teams to these big conferences like Val Expo, is so that we can interact with appraisers. We don't come in for the hour we're speaking and run to the airport. We're there for the entire event for that very reason. So for me, as old as I am, I see so many friends, including yourself there. So it's a lot of fun. I also enjoy meeting new people. I also enjoy, and I realize it's a be careful what you wish for a moment, I also enjoy hearing from appraisers, particularly when they can share a point of view. And that's absolutely what it's all about. It's not about Freddie or even our friends at Fannie about dictating something out and not caring. I think we absolutely care an industry point of view on a variety of things. And I'll go a step further. You ask about the words and phrases, the evolution of that, and I think there's a great example that appraisers are paying attention and that they do care. Our data suggests that lenders and appraisers have taken action to really virtually eliminate the use, which fires at a very, very low rate, of the potentially biased or problematic words and phrases in appraisals. When we were emulating before the warnings went to hard stops for the unsuitable words, we were seeing a trigger rate somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 or 7% across all appraisals. That was going to be a big issue if we were hard stopping reports, even at that percentage, and worked on the messaging. We worked with folks like you. We work directly with our sellers, which are our lenders, our client advisory boards. We reached out and touched as many lenders and appraisers as we could. And anyway, over a 6-month period from the middle of 2023 to the first part to January of this year, we saw that 6 and 7% go down to 0.1% of a trigger of a word. And out of curiosity, so that's dramatic improvement, and it's really kudos to the appraisers and our lender friends who kind of collaborated on this with us. And I think the appraisers really deserve a lot of credit. I mean, they listened, they paid attention on the ones that do fire. We're all appraisers at our core on our team here at Freddie Mac, and sometimes we can't resist. We call the appraisers up, and whatever the trigger or the firing was, and most of the time, overwhelmingly majority, most of the time, it was, oops, I cloned a report. That's an old one. I should have taken that out. I screened the wording, and I'm trying to be very careful in my report. So it's generally a mistake and kind of a thanks for the catch. I think that it's a great sort of segue into the new UAD environment. I know we're going to have a big session next week at the Expo as well on the new uniform appraisal data set. That's going to enable appraisers to tell most of the story through data elements and enumerated data fields rather than text. They still can write a report. They still can add commentary. And Sean Murphy from Freddie Mac, Ken DeFeo from Fannie are the two experts, and they're going to have a whole session on that. But they're going to kind of walk through what that's going to look like, why that really is a good thing, learning curve aside, older appraisers like me aside, that it's going to take a little bit of an adjustment, but it is going to be a good thing. And I kind of ties in a way, I know I took this in a little different direction, ties in a way to the use of words and phrases and actually, free-form text in reports.
We've had this conversation about the new UAD. You and I have. It's going to be a big change for a lot of appraisers. There is going to be a learning curve for us out in the field to understand what exactly it is Fannie and Freddie want with the new UAD. We're also going to have to learn how to use our various appraisal softwares in a new format. But the thing about the new UAD that I've seen snippets of and examples of is one of my most hated, least favorite things about reviewing appraisal reports is when I see the phrase see addendum and then I start shuffling through the addendum and I cannot find the page, it's buried in there. And it's not that
Yeah,
someone's trying to hide something. It's just
it's
you
frustrating.
do your addendum in one way, I do my addendum in another way, and Paul Rill does his addendum in another way, and Brian Reynolds does his another way.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of time to find those specific elements. The new UAD for the review process is going to be so much cleaner because you've got room right there in the right spot to talk about the thing and to expand the field.
Absolutely. I mean, you used the example before with your highest and best use analysis and the current form. We're getting away from forms, but the current form has a little box and a little line. And, for many years, my comment was, a dated form is the wrong reason not to manufacture a credible appraisal. That's easy to say. And a lot of appraisers get that, and they use that latter mentioned addendum form. But, when we first started to message on this, Hal, and take the road show across the country, I had a cutaway and many slides. And then I just had a screenshot of the addendum form, which is, whatever it says, general addendum form, and it's totally blank. And it was just the parking lot, a dumping spot, whatever for anything. And that's not to point a finger at the appraisers at all. To your point, it's the only place they could put something. But across all the appraisers that are actively doing work, I might manufacture it differently than you, than Paul, than Brian, and all the other appraisers mentioned. So, yeah, so it'll bring that level of consistency. And again, not to give a preview or tease the UAD session, but they're going to go into a lot of detail about the number of elements they thought of. They had a lot of appraisers on that joint Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae team, which I think was great because they deconstructed and then reconstructed pretty much every section of the old form to consider what could be improved. And to your point, associate commentary where it's needed in the report as you're developing it. So it's dynamic. So you don't have, I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest changes for a lot of appraisers is we're used to pulling up a form and filling out the form. Now we're going to interact with a data set. And if you've got a complicated highest and best use, if you've got a complicated easement, shared driveway, something where you need to provide some additional commentary, just start providing it, and that will populate on the form in the section that it's relevant. So there's going to be a big learning curve. We did a webinar a week or two back about UAD, and we had a variety of questions, and which tells me the appraisers are getting there, but they're not quite there. And I get it; it's still off in their minds a year or two out, but it's going to enable. One of the questions I could collect my thoughts. One of the questions was, what's going to be the biggest change in your view for appraisers? And I think the biggest change is all this specific and special form types are gone. Yeah. So right now the assignment begins with picking the right form and filling out the form, as we said. That's gone. Now you're just going to open up through your software provider, whomever you use, and begin to kind of answer questions and dynamically work through what you did. So and that'll take some time. And I wouldn't judge it on the first 10 reports or 12 reports because there's going to be an on-ramp, right? I think it's going to take some time, but once you learn it and once you can gain some efficiencies with it, I think there's no turning back.
And I think what happens is when the new UAD comes out and is being used kind of across the board, what we're going to see is the software providers are going to be making updates based on what the feedback is from appraisers, but we're going to see some enterprising appraisers out there creating side worksheets and things to find those efficiencies, much in the same way they do with the 1004 form and those things. And I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be kind of fun. Look, we've been shoehorning data into a static form for what, 30 years now. My dad used to get his forms with a fishing worm stapled to the package. It hasn't really changed that much since then. Right. So it's going to be a change. It's going to be a learning curve. But I think, like anything else where we see a change in a process, it's going to be kind of painful. There's going to be pain points in the beginning, but as we start to figure out how to use it, I think it becomes easier in the long run and makes us more productive in the long run. Scott, I got to do this.
Yeah.
I got to take a quick break and hear from one of our other commercial sponsors, and then we will be right back.
Are you wondering how property insurance is changing in the wake of climate events and natural disasters? Need a primer on appraising religious properties? Want to learn how tech tools can streamline your workload? The Appraisal Institute's Trending Topics Thursdays webinar series is designed to help appraisers everywhere do their best work by keeping a pulse on industry trends, tools, and relevant skills. Join the Appraisal Institute as a member to gain access to our on-demand library of timely content featuring leading experts, or join us live for the next webinar. Live sessions are free to attend for members and non-members alike. Visit appraisalinstitute.org to explore the free webinar series.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Appraisal Buzz. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. I'm joined today by Scott Reuter from Freddie Mac. Scott, thank you for being here today. You know, I heard someone say the other day, in these uncertain times, whatever it was they said after that. And somebody on the panel in that conference said, my friend, there are no certain times. They don't exist. Every decade, every epoch, every week has uncertainty baked into it. But there are some, it feels like right now there's some kind of emergent kind of acute uncertainties in the appraisal space. Do you think that sense of acute uncertainty is somehow causing some of the issues appraisers are having with trying to define and analyze market conditions and those kind of things?
I think you're right. I really do. In my sentiment in my heart, I really believe I understand that from appraisers. I really do. And I think a lot of times, people send me clips. Hey, did you see this on the blog or this on social media where somebody just blurted out a thought, a not very well developed thought, in reacting to something that the enterprises are doing. And, it's not always great, but I guess it's a way to say, I think I understand where that comes from. There is a lot of change, and there's a lot changing right now to the certainty and uncertainty that you talked about. So we've got, a profession that, many of us are aging. You've got dramatic changes in the form and format that appraisers are used to. That's good. You've got a large shadow cast kind of in our current environment on appraisal gap, discrimination, appraisal bias. What role, if any, are appraisers playing in that? And we've been under the spotlight and receiving scrutiny like we never have had in this industry. I heard somebody say recently, there was an appraiser, he says, he said, I went 30 years without people really knowing what I did. Now everybody knows what I do. In other words, and it's not on the flattering tale that we want to tell. It's, I read the New York Times story, I read the Baltimore Sun story or whatever. So anyway, that's a bit of a digression, but I think on point in the fact that we do need to come together and work together. You can have a completely divergent point of view, and I understand that, I really do. And if the only avenue for the appraiser that's alone working at home is one of the blogs or whatever, it doesn't, in my personal view, make it right, but that's okay. I get that. I would rather send me an email, reach out, let's talk at a conference, let's try to figure out what we're doing. A lot of these component and big structural pieces that we're working on as an industry to put in place, I think are going to be better for the industry. It doesn't mean it's going to feel great, but anyway, I hope that's a little bit on point with the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of close this out, we here at Appraiser Learning and Appraisal Buzz, we're not a very large company. We're a fairly small company. In fact, we're privately owned. We've been doing our education delivery, and I'm talking back of the house stuff, just process in-house to get courses created and delivered to those things. The same way for about 5 years now. We've made some tweaks along the way, but we realize we need to make some substantial changes. And even in a very small organization like this, I had a conversation with Doug in our office, who is one of my all-time. I love Doug. He's a good friend. He is a coworker. I said, well, why don't we do X, Y, and Z? And he said, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. And Doug's role is to point out, possible flaws and possible pain points for changing a thing. But what happened is we talked through, where do we want to be? How do we want to clean this process up? And given what we have right now, do we need to tweak more things or throw the baby out with the bathwater and create a new system? And we're not entirely there yet. But I tell the story to illustrate the point that change is difficult, even with a small group. And when you're looking at an entire industry, guys, this is a colossal change in the way we're going to be doing our work. There are going to be some pain points, but I have been at meetings and in conferences where Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHFA, what the two GSEs like to call the regulator, are seeking input from practicing appraisers and trying to suss out what is the right way to do this. So I say all that to say, Scott, I recognize, and I want the appraisal crowd out there listening to recognize that it's a hard thing that you guys are trying to do. For the appraisers out there in the field that don't stay up to date on changes in government, policy and stuff like that, it could feel like there's this directive from on high, thou shalt do it this way from henceforth. That's not what's happening. I respect the fact that you guys are talking to appraisers, talking to educators, talking to not only appraisers, but lenders, because they're part of your risk process too, to find out what's the best way to do this process. So all that long little prattling message to say, I know it's a hard job you guys are doing. I get it. I want my appraiser friends out there listening to the Buzzcast, my lender friends out there listening to the Buzzcast, to acknowledge the difficult work that you've been doing and the fact that you've been bringing in industry people to talk about how to do it.
Yeah, greatly appreciate that. No, and there's to your comment, there's a lot of stakeholders that have seats at the table. I think our regulator does a great job. To your point, they have reached out on behalf of the enterprises in addition to us individually with requests for information, casting the net wide, holding symposiums, being as open as they can to get input. And it's going to take the entire industry, all those separate, at times fragmented component parts, to come together and determine some of the big directional pieces that we're working on. And again, I think UAD is one of them.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna, I cannot help but pivot to a pitch for Val Expo. Appraisers that go to conferences tend to be more informed than appraisers who don't go to conferences. There was a time in my career when I didn't go to conferences for several years. And what I found myself doing is sitting in my office, working by myself, thinking about things and agreeing with myself and sending a report out the door. When I got back into the conference world, not only did I get industry updates and find out what the changes are here and the changes are there, I found this network of appraisers. If I've got a booger to deal with, I've got a wonky property that's throwing some curveballs at me, I can make a call to a friend in California or in Wisconsin or in Ohio and ask them their opinion and gather that kind of information. So if you're an appraiser out there listening to the podcast and you've never been to a conference, you haven't been in quite some time, join us. It'll be next week in Las Vegas for Val Expo 2024. It is August 19, 20, and 21. I would love to see you there. I know Scott would love to see you there. Scott, again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I'm going to see if Jim Morrison is still eavesdropping on the conversation. Jim, do we have an anonymous appraiser question that Scott and I can try to muddy the waters with an answer?
We do. And just to follow up on what you were saying before I get into that, I remember when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had workshops at Valuation Expo to get feedback from appraisers. So this is the place to go if you want to have feedback, want to be able to talk and touch these GSEs. and actually getting to talk to them. So we appreciate them wanting the feedback from our attendees. But let's get into the anonymous appraiser question. It says, I'm using a comp that the MLS states was built in 1964. I always check the year to built against county records. The county shows that the year built is 1979, but I recognize the property as one I appraised 8 years ago. My old appraisal can sort out this discrepancy, I assume, and the county had the year built at 1957 at that time. I matched the photos, the MLS, the county website, and my prior appraisal. It's the same house. How do I handle the difference in years built for the comp? It could affect whether I use an age adjustment or not on the home I'm appraising.
Does that really happen? No, I'm kidding. I know it happens all the time. I'm not being smug.
22, that's a 22-year spread.
That's right, exactly. Listen, again, as an appraiser, I feel the appraiser's pain. Appraisers often are faced with conflicting information, I think either for the subject or a potential comp. Part of our job is to constantly evaluate, reevaluate, and reconcile all that information. And appraiser needs to consider all that available data rather and reconcile to the most reliable indications. That's a long way to say, if you're in an area where the county or public records are meticulous and accurate, and you've got a high degree of confidence of all the data points you gather, you may put a little more weight on that because the county's up to date. If the county struggles, if it's a rural county, if it's maybe there's some challenges there, then the appraiser is going to have to keep doing the work. I think I heard in your question the appraiser might have appraised this property. Well, maybe they have, by virtue of that, maybe a through line to something more accurate. And I don't know how you're an appraiser. I mean, I would just say you've got to do the work. You've got to do the work to evaluate and reconcile what you think is the most accurate, and just tell the reader what you did. Hey, the county was here, prior appraisal's here, the MLS is here. It's a big span. You're basically trying to determine within some degree of accuracy what that age is, so that you can get into the marketplace and see if the market is recognizing any adjustment that may need to be developed and applied. Agreed. What say thee, Hal?
I agree 100%. I have a couple of other things I'm going to throw in there to consider. So Scott, you mentioned, we deal with discrepancies all the time. Let's just kind of back it up and look at square footage. I mean, it is not in the least bit unusual for MLS to show a house as 5,000 square feet, and tax assessor's office showed the house as 2,500 square feet. I'm literally thinking of a property across the street from me here in Nashville. And the discrepancy is the ADU, the tax assessor doesn't count the ADU in the gross square footage. The real estate agent did because they wanted to show it as a bigger house. In those situations, you end up with MLS square footage, tax assessor square footage, real estate appraisers square footage, which at this point we know is to ANSI standards. In that case, I discussed the other two square footage estimates so that I acknowledge here's what everybody else is saying, but I did the measurement, I did it at ANSI standards, here's what I'm going to call it. When it comes to the actual age of a property, I mean, my first thing, if I had a 22-year spread from 1957 to 1979, from which to choose an actual age, what I would do personally is I would take a sample of the foundation and I would take it to Vanderbilt and have to do carbon dating on it to see exactly how old it was. If you can't do that, I would suggest that in the work of an appraiser, and Scott, you tell me if I'm off base on this, the more important number is effective age. Mm-hmm. So what I might do as an appraiser is just articulate, hey, I appraised this property 10 years ago, and in that file, I had a record from the county that said it was built in 1957. The current county records say it was built in 1979. The MLS was built in 1964. I called the county and they said, oh, we changed the date of construction because it was significantly renovated in 1979. Okay, well, that's an answer to part of that. Then I would pick the one that I think is the most reliable. And I would say, I'm going to call this the actual age, but that doesn't really matter. I'm an appraiser. I'm going to look at the effective age of this property, and that's what I'm going to base my adjustment on. That's my thoughts. Does that
Yeah,
jive
no,
with?
exactly. You went through and verified all those component pieces, and you're absolutely right. So it could be a home that actually was built in the 50s and substantially improved, whereas the effective age is going to be considerably less. The other thing too, I mean, yeah, without doing the trip to Vanderbilt and the carbon dating, which I think is great for your company and your use, uh, a lot of times if these are in your market, maybe drive by it, maybe do a little, homes that built in the 50s and homes that were built in almost 1980 are typically a little bit different in design and structure, maybe even quality. So that also could be give you some indication. My dad used to go like this, like trust your nose, trust what kind of makes sense once you're at the end of the assignment, and that last bit of analysis that you're going to do, you could apply that here. So, and then again, to me, as a reader of a lot of reports and a part of a broader team that looks at a lot of individual appraisal reports, just walk the reader through what you did. And it's less about, aha, you're wrong, it was really this one instead of this one. It's like, no, here's how did took all these steps, did this, did that, and it leaned heavily on effective age. Actual age was less important. Here was the thought process behind that, and how it manifests itself in the completed report. And I think that's what we're after.
All right, I'm gonna just like dial it down real quick. If I have this situation and I put in a report directly to Scott Reuter, I've done my appraisal report, and it's Scott is my intended user, and the intended use is for Scott to pass judgment on me as a human being. And I say, Scott, here's the information that I've gathered. The house was either built in 57, 64, 79. Here's the information I've gathered. Here's the information I've verified. Mm-hmm. I talked to the county assessor. They said it was renovated in 1979. That's the reason they use that number, whatever. And then here's how I've analyzed this information, and here's my conclusion. I mean, what I've done there is followed USPAP, a sentence out of USPAP directly, which is an appraiser must collect, verify, and analyze all information necessary for credible assignment results. Mm-hmm. If I just do those things on that property, I've done the work, and Scott's going to read it and say, wow, Hal is not only an excellent appraiser, he's a really good guy too.
Yeah, just do it and explain what you did. We had an example off of age and into square footage. There was an appraiser where we had submitted to the portal the same property a number of times. I want to say 8 or 10 times. And 9 of those, let's say it was 10, 9 had the exact square footage that the county had. And we had somebody who was much larger, reporting a much larger GLA. So it stood out. And the only benchmark we had in that area was the county record. And this appraiser actually measured it. This appraiser did a tremendous job. He was the only one that was right out of the other ones who reconciled to the county record. And anyway, it just goes to show sometimes you can be the only one doing the right thing, but do the right thing. And you can evidence that in your report. And that also will come out on the other end when and if that hits, your lender, bank, AMC, one of the enterprises, the investor world, and beyond. So yeah, I think the steps you explained and speculated you would take, I think, are spot on.
Yeah. And look, this is a very real situation. I can understand the appraiser's frustration, and I can understand the notion of, oh my gosh, this seems confusing. There's a house less than a block down the street from my house. My house was built in 1907. That house was built in 1907 plus or minus, maybe 1905, 1910, something like that. The entire neighborhood was built in the same time frame. It was taken down to the studs. Then they jacked that part up off the existing foundation, came in underneath it, poured a new foundation, set that back down onto the new foundation, and then added 3,000 square feet of living area behind it. My guess is Davidson County is going to put year built as 2024 instead of 1907. So it's a very real thing to deal with. Yeah. Just do the work, do the analysis, verify as much as you can. And at the end of the day, tell your client, here's what I found. Here's how I analyzed it. Here's my conclusion, and then be ready to stick with it. So I think we're good on that. Jim Morrison, We Scott and I can kind of run all the way around Robin Hood's barn to answer a question, but do you think we gave a decent answer?
Well, and also it's a comp, right? It's not the actual appraisal that he's doing. So if there's that much uncertainty, maybe find another comp. And I know that can be difficult, but
Look at you. Yes.
Look at Jim Morrison coming in with the right answer.
That's right.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, do we have anything else we need to talk about?
No, that's all. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to seeing you in a week.
Yeah. Can't wait, guys. Thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Scott. If we have nothing else for Jim Morrison and Scott Reuter, I'm Hal Humphreys, your host on Appraisal Buzz. And please do join us next week in Las Vegas for Val Expo. Love to see you there.